Imagine a young couple on their honeymoon in New York City, 1996. They had just been married, still glowing from their wedding photos, still clutching their travel tickets with excitement. They checked into their hotel, made plans for dinner, and promised their families they'd call the next day. But the next day never came. The newlyweds vanished without a trace. Their luggage remained in the room, their wedding ring sat neatly on the dresser, and their car was still parked outside. It was as if they had stepped out for a moment, and were swallowed by the city itself. For decades, their families begged for answers. Detectives combed through records, traced their last known movements, and searched for witnesses. Nothing. The case faded into silence, another cold file stacked in the archives. The world moved on, but the couple's parents never stopped leaving flowers, never stopped hoping that one day something, anything, would surface. And then, in 2022, something did. A storage facility auction revealed a sealed trunk, untouched for more than 2 decades. Inside were personal items linked to the missing couple. Along with something so disturbing, the FBI reopened the case. What was hidden in that trunk changed everything. Investigators thought they knew. If this happened to someone you loved, if your son or daughter disappeared during their honeymoon, would you believe they simply vanished? Or would you wonder if someone had been pulling the strings all along? Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your country in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you believe some stories were never meant to stay buried. You picture it clearly. A humid summer evening in July 1996. New York alive with neon and noise, the kind of city where every street corner seems to hum with possibility. You imagine yourself stepping into the lobby of the Hotel Astoria, a mid-range hotel on the Upper West Side, its brass doors smudged with fingerprints, its marble floor polished to a dull glow. It wasn't glamorous, but for Daniel and Rebecca Hayes, it was their honeymoon stop, the place where love was supposed to expand into forever. They were 24 and 22, barely out of college, brimming with the kind of optimism that photographs always captured in their smiles. Daniel was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who still carried himself like the captain of his high school football team. Rebecca was petite, with auburn hair that curled in the humidity, a woman who had grown up in a small Pennsylvania town and dreamed of seeing the world. Together, they had pooled their modest savings for this trip, skipping a lavish wedding so they could afford a week exploring New York before continuing north to Niagara Falls. The bellhop remembered them. Everyone did. Rebecca had asked for extra towels and smiled in that way that softened even the most impatient clerk. Daniel tipped more than he needed to, trying to make a good impression. They rolled their modest luggage into room 512, a corner room with a view of the Hudson if you leaned just right against the glass. That night they called home. Rebecca's mother answered, hearing the excitement in her daughter's voice. "We're safe, we're happy, we'll call again tomorrow." But that call never came. When the housekeeper entered the room 2 mornings later, the bed was made, untouched, as though no one had slept in it. The television was off. The closet held their clothes neatly hung. On the nightstand sat 2 wedding rings side by side, as though placed there deliberately. Their car was still in the lot, ticket stub folded on the dashboard. But Daniel and Rebecca were gone. Imagine being Rebecca's mother, waiting by the phone, then calling the hotel, your voice trembling as you ask for your daughter. Imagine the hollow pause before the clerk admits he hasn't seen them since check-in. Police were called. Detectives walked the corridors, asked questions of staff, checked camera footage. But this was 1996. The hotel's security system was little more than a camera above the front desk, one that had jammed halfway through the night they vanished. The only thing visible was Rebecca stepping into the elevator, laughing at something Daniel whispered. After that, nothing. Theories began immediately. Had they eloped again? Decided to start a new life without telling anyone? Had they been mugged, abducted, pulled into one of the city's darker undercurrents? Some suggested Daniel had gambling debts, though no record supported it. Others whispered about Rebecca's ex-boyfriend, a man who had once threatened that she wouldn't make it down the aisle. But he was cleared. Nowhere near New York that week. The strangest part was what they left behind. The rings, their passports, Rebecca's journal, open to a page where she had written a single line the night before they disappeared. "Sometimes I feel like someone is watching us." Detectives scoured the hotel. One staff member recalled something odd, A man in a baseball cap lingering near the vending machines around 1 a.m. Another remembered hearing a door slam in the hallway, footsteps echoing too quickly. But when sketches were made, none matched anyone registered at the hotel. Their families arrived in New York, plastering the city with flyers, smiling photos of the newlyweds beneath the bold black word, missing. Newspapers ran small columns. Local news aired quick segments. But within weeks, other tragedies and crimes crowded out the story. The city was noisy, relentless. Daniel and Rebecca Hayes faded into its background hum. Still, investigators kept circling back to one detail: the trunk. Not in 1996, not yet, but whispers of it would emerge later when silence had stretched into decades. For now, the case turned cold. Witnesses grew forgetful, tips dried up. Room 512 was rented to other travelers who slept where Daniel and Rebecca had once dreamed. The rings were cataloged into evidence. Rebecca's journal was boxed away, and the city swallowed their story whole. But you can't erase love so easily. Their families never stopped searching. Rebecca's mother returned to New York every anniversary, leaving flowers outside the hotel, whispering into the night, "Come home." Daniel's brother hired private investigators who traced false leads to bus stations, train depots, even rumors of sightings in Florida. All dead ends. And then, 26 years later, a storage auction in Queens unearthed something no one expected. A trunk sealed with rust, its tag faint but legible. It bore two names, scrawled in faded ink: Daniel and Rebecca. The man who bought the unit said he nearly left it behind, thinking it was worthless. But when he pried it open, he found more than dust. Inside were clothes: Rebecca's sundress, Daniel's college sweatshirt, folded carefully as though waiting to be worn again. A pair of shoes, scuffed and stained. A camera, its film undeveloped. And at the bottom, wrapped in brittle paper, an envelope marked simply, "Do not forget." That discovery would send the FBI racing back into a case thought long dead. And what they uncovered in that trunk would shake even seasoned agents. But the truth hadn't surfaced yet. Not all of it, because tucked inside that same storage unit, taped beneath the lid of the trunk, was one more item: a gas station receipt, time-stamped 3:14 a.m. on the night of their disappearance. Signed not by Daniel, not by Rebecca, but by someone else, and no one knew what was waiting in the dark. You imagine standing in that dimly lit storage unit, the concrete walls sweating with moisture, the smell of rust and dust clinging to every breath. The auctioneer's voice has long faded, and now it's just you, the trunk, and the terrible weight of what it might hold. The metal lid groans as it opens, as though reluctant to reveal its secrets after 26 years of silence. Inside, at first the objects seem ordinary: clothes, shoes, folded shirts. You tell yourself these could belong to anyone. But then you see the initials stitched into the fabric: D.H., Daniel Hayes. You see Rebecca's sundress, yellow with tiny blue flowers, preserved in the kind of careful fold that only she would make. These aren't random objects. These belong to them. At the bottom, the camera rests like a forgotten eye, an old 35mm Nikon, dust coating its surface. The film canister inside rattles faintly when lifted, as if daring you to develop it. And beneath it, the envelope. Its paper is brittle, its edges curled with age, but the words scrawled across the front are sharp enough to cut. "Do not forget." You imagine sliding it open. Inside are photographs, grainy, off-angle shots of the hotel hallway from 1996. You see Rebecca stepping into the elevator, her smile frozen in time. You see Daniel carrying a bag, turning his head toward the lens as if caught by surprise. These aren't surveillance stills. They're intimate, stolen images. Someone was following them. The gas station receipt is worse. Time-stamped 3:14 a.m., on the night they vanished from a station 40 miles north of the city. The signature is jagged, unfamiliar, and yet the attendant's notes scrawled at the bottom of the receipt are chilling. Young couple, looked nervous. Man in cap paid, but Daniel never wore a cap. You picture the FBI team spreading these items across a sterile table, the fluorescent lights flattening every detail into evidence. Agents exchange glances, silent but shaken. This isn't just memorabilia from a missing couple. It's evidence someone has kept hidden deliberately for over 2 decades. Detective Claire Whitfield, now gray at the temples but still sharp, is called back onto the case. She had been a rookie when Daniel and Rebecca disappeared. She remembers standing in that hotel hallway, scribbling notes in a shaky hand, haunted by Rebecca's mother begging for answers. Now she is seasoned, battle-worn, and the sight of that trunk reopens old wounds. Claire flips through the photographs, pausing at one that makes her skin prickle. It shows Rebecca in the hotel lobby, glancing over her shoulder, her smile faltering, her eyes clouded with unease. It echoes the journal entry left behind. Sometimes I feel like someone is watching us. The camera film is developed. The images spill out in stark black and white, their edges curling, their subjects frozen in uncanny clarity. A blurred man in the background of nearly every frame, his cap pulled low, his face obscured. At the reception desk, in the elevator reflection, standing near the vending machine, always there, never acknowledged, you imagine yourself in that position, looking back at your honeymoon photos years later, realizing there was always someone else in the frame. Someone who shouldn't have been there, someone who was closer than you ever knew. The FBI traces the storage unit rental records. The lease began in 1997, paid in cash every 6 months. No name, no ID, just bills passed over the counter. The last payment posted in 2019, then silence. Whoever had kept that trunk hidden had been active until recently. Agents canvassed the area. One employee remembers a man, tall, wiry, baseball cap pulled low, who always came after hours, refusing help with his boxes. He never spoke more than a few words. But he always wore gloves. Claire begins connecting the dots. The gas station receipt from 3:14 a.m. doesn't just place them north of the city. It places them in a corridor tied to other disappearances. A traveling salesman in 1989, a college student in 1993, a mother and child in 1995. Each case unsolved, each linked by forged or inexplicable receipts. And now Daniel and Rebecca. The theory takes shape. The author. That's what Claire begins calling him. Not just a kidnapper, not just a killer, but someone who rewrites stories. Someone who fabricates paper trails, receipts, documents, proof that people were somewhere they weren't, doing things they never did. Paper becomes the weapon. Paper becomes truth. You can feel the dread settling in. If the receipts are forged, then the timeline of the Newlyweds last night is fractured, unreliable. Did they ever leave the hotel? Or were they taken before dawn? Their trail rewritten by someone meticulous enough to fool investigators for decades. Rebecca's journal is pulled back from archives. On the last page, in handwriting confirmed as hers, is a note scribbled hastily. He follows us everywhere. Even here. The he was never identified. Now with the photos and receipts, Claire believes she knows who it was. The man in the cap. The author. But the most chilling detail emerges when the receipts are cross-checked. The same handwriting that signed the Hayes' gas station slip appears on another receipt, tied to a vanished couple in 1987, and another in 2001. Different names, different towns, but the same looping signature. You imagine the FBI evidence board now, strings crisscrossing photographs, receipts, maps. Dozens of names, dozens of dates, and at the center a faceless man in a cap. But the trunk has one last secret. Taped beneath the lining, hidden away where only the most careful would look, is a Polaroid. Grainy, faded, but unmistakable. Daniel and Rebecca sitting in what looks like a motel room. Their faces are pale, their smiles forced, their eyes hollow. And behind them, reflected faintly in a cracked mirror, is the man in the cap. The timestamp. July 14th, 1996. The day after they disappeared. Claire stares at the photograph, her chest tightening. This isn't a simple cold case. This is a story still alive, still pulsing, still watching. And as she lays the Polaroid on the table, the lights flicker. Somewhere deep down she knows this isn't the end of the trail. It's the beginning. Because the author doesn't just erase people. He makes sure they are remembered in the wrong way. And now the FBI is on his page. You picture yourself back in New York. The city roaring as always, but for Detective Claire Whitfield, the noise only made the silence of the Hayes case louder. After the trunk surfaced, whispers spread through law enforcement circles. If the items were genuine, then someone had kept Daniel and Rebecca's lives boxed up like trophies for over 20 years. That wasn't coincidence. That was ritual. Claire walked the narrow corridor of the Hotel Astoria again, now remodeled, its walls painted a cheerful beige, its carpet replaced, its name changed to the Riverside Inn. Tourists checked in, laughing and dragging rolling suitcases. unaware they were treading the same floors where two lives had vanished. But Claire wasn't here for nostalgia. She was here for details that had been overlooked. You imagine her flipping through the old logbook, photocopied into digital archives. Daniel and Rebecca, room 512, July 12th. Paid with traveler's checks. Nothing unusual. But the clerk on duty that night, long retired, had left a small note in his personal journal discovered years later. Couple checked in. Man in cap hanging around lobby. Didn't seem like guest, the man in the cap again, but hearsay wasn't enough. Claire needed a living voice. Someone who had seen what the trunk only hinted at. That's when she found Marjorie Klein. Marjorie had been a waitress at a diner 2 blocks from the hotel in 1996. At the time, she had told police she didn't remember serving the couple. But when Claire tracked her down in 2022, the woman's eyes darkened. She was 68 now, hands trembling slightly as she lit a cigarette in her Queens apartment. I lied back then, she admitted, smoke curling toward the ceiling. I saw them. I served them. You lean in as Claire must have. Marjorie's voice cracked as she explained. It was after midnight, July 13th, 1996. Daniel and Rebecca came into the diner, holding hands, Rebecca in that same yellow sundress found later in the trunk. They ordered coffee and pie. They looked tired but happy. Normal. Except they weren't alone. There was a man. Marjorie whispered, her ash trembling above the tray. Baseball cap. Sat 2 booths away. Never ate. Never looked at me. Only looked at them. All night. Claire's heart must have pounded. The man in the cap. Always there, always lurking. Marjorie remembered more. Rebecca kept glancing back nervously. Daniel seemed restless, checking his watch, whispering something she couldn't hear. When they left, the man in the cap stood too. He didn't follow right away, but minutes later, Marjorie watched him through the window as he drifted into the same direction. Why hadn't she told the truth back then? Because the very next night, an envelope appeared at her apartment door. Inside was $200 cash and a note with just 3 words. Stay quiet, Marjorie. You imagine being her, finding hush money slipped under your door, realizing someone knows where you live. Someone who can silence you if you speak. Fear kept her mouth closed for decades. Now with the trunk reopened, she wanted it off her chest. But her testimony raised new questions. If Daniel and Rebecca were seen alive after midnight at a diner, then how could they also appear on a gas station receipt 40 miles away at 3:14 a.m.? Both couldn't be true, unless someone was manufacturing one version of events. The FBI developed the film from the Nikon again, enhancing the negatives. In one frame, Rebecca sits in the diner booth, the reflection in the window behind her showing not only the man in the cap, but another man seated at the counter. His face half obscured, but his jacket faintly embroidered with something. MSS Maintenance Services and Supplies, a company that once held contracts with motels and storage facilities across New York and New Jersey. The same kind of shell companies Claire had traced in other disappearances. The connection was tightening. But then came the knock on Marjorie's door. 2 nights after speaking with Claire, she heard it. 3 sharp raps at midnight. She froze, cigarette ash falling to the floor. Through the peephole she saw nothing, only shadows. When she opened the door an inch, there was an envelope lying on the mat. No money this time, just a single Polaroid. It showed her sitting at her own diner booth in 1996 serving coffee to Rebecca and Daniel. The perspective was from outside the window. Someone else had been documenting her too, and scrawled across the bottom in black marker were 2 words. You remember. Claire arrived within the hour. She bagged the photo, but the message was clear. Someone was still watching, still silencing, still rewriting. You feel the dread curling tighter. This isn't just about one couple. This is about a network of watchers who have kept entire stories buried under falsified paper and staged photographs. And anyone who speaks is reminded that they are part of the narrative too. As Claire left Marjorie's apartment, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop turning pages. And when she glanced back at her car parked under the dim street lamp, her blood ran cold, because sitting on the hood was a baseball cap. You imagine Claire staring at the baseball cap on the hood of her car, its brim damp with the mist of the summer night, its presence a taunt. It was more than a warning. It was an invitation. Whoever had left it wanted her to know they were watching, wanted her to feel the weight of being inside the story rather than outside it. She bagged it for evidence, but the truth pulsed hot in her chest. This wasn't just a cold case. It was alive. At the bureau, analysts dusted the cap for prints. Nothing but smudges, as if wiped clean deliberately. The fabric was ordinary, a cheap brand sold in dozens of stores in the mid-90s. But the inside lining carried something more sinister. A faint ink stamp. Blurred but legible enough. MSS Maintenance Services and Supplies. The same company logo glimpsed in the diner photo. The same name tied to shell companies orbiting disappearances for decades. You feel the net tightening. It wasn't random. The Hayes case was one thread in a larger weave, a system of vanishings all bound by falsified receipts, hidden storage units, and a faceless author who knew how to rewrite truth itself. Claire traced MSS through public records. The company never filed taxes, never had a listed address, but its contracts spread like a ghost shadow. Motels, storage facilities, gas stations, always in the margins, always in places where people disappeared. One name appeared faintly on a 1997 contract. Victor K., no last name. No address. Just an initial, a signature in blocky handwriting. The same handwriting that signed Daniel and Rebecca's gas station receipt. You imagine Claire pinning that receipt on the board, stringing red thread from one case to the next, the photos multiplying. 1987, the Millers vanished from a roadside inn in Jersey. 23, a college student lost between bus stops. 1995, a mother and child gone after refueling near Albany. And always the receipts, signed by hands that didn't belong. The deeper she dug, the stranger it became. Witness statements from unrelated cases began to sound eerily familiar. A man in a cap at the edge of vision, someone slipping hush money into lockers, envelopes delivered at midnight. Each story was a variation on the same nightmare, as if a script was being repeated over and over, perfected across decades. But then Claire uncovered something unexpected. A storage archive leased not by MSS, but by the city itself. Buried in the municipal records was a unit in Brooklyn, locked under police evidence overflow, forgotten for years. The lease date? 2003. The contents? Miscellaneous documents. You picture her prying open that unit's metal door, flashlight beam cutting through dust motes. Stacks of boxes leaned against one another, their labels faded, their tape brittle. Inside the first box, hundreds of receipts. Gas stations, motels, diners, laundromats, each slip of paper meticulously bagged. Some bore names of known missing persons. Others bore names no one recognized. Entire families, entire stories, erased everywhere except for these forged trails. At the bottom of one box, Claire found something worse. A notebook, its cover cracked with age, its pages filled with tight, deliberate handwriting. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. Dates, locations, initials. Each entry followed by a short phrase, forgotten, silenced, buried. And in the margin of the July 1996 entry, the initials DHRH, Daniel and Rebecca Hayes. The word beside it, corrected. The word sears itself into your mind, corrected. As if their disappearance wasn't a crime, but a mistake fixed by someone's hand. You imagine Claire clutching that notebook, realizing she's holding the playbook of the author himself. These weren't random vanishings. They were orchestrated, cataloged, recorded like drafts in a manuscript. Whoever this man was, he believed he wasn't killing. He was editing. But the archive hid something else. Another trunk, smaller, its lock rusted but intact. Inside, wrapped in layers of old newspaper, was a Polaroid camera, the same model found with the Hayes belongings. A strip of undeveloped film was still inside. When processed, it revealed 3 photos. The first, Daniel and Rebecca in their hotel room, eyes hollow, smiles strained. The second, a blurred shot of the hotel hallway, a shadowed figure standing near the elevator. The third, Claire herself, younger, from 1996, standing outside the hotel, notebook in hand. Someone had been documenting not just the victims, but the investigators too. Your skin prickles at the thought. If every detective who touched these cases was photographed, cataloged, maybe even targeted, then how deep did this archive run? How many stories had been rewritten not just by silencing families, but by controlling the very people meant to uncover the truth? As Claire sifted through the archive, her phone buzzed. A new text from the same blocked number. You're not the reader. You're the next page. Her blood turned to ice. She wasn't chasing a ghost. She was being written into the manuscript. When she returned to her apartment, the hallway light flickered. On her doormat lay another envelope, heavier this time. Inside were 5 receipts, each bearing her own name. Dated across the past 3 weeks, from places she had never been. A diner in Jersey, a motel upstate, a gas station off I-95, each signed Claire Whitfield. Proof she had been somewhere she hadn't. Proof that could overwrite her life as easily as it had erased the haze. And as she dropped the slips onto her desk, the final one slid free. Its timestamp read tonight, 10:42 p.m., the exact moment she had been standing in the storage archive. Her chest tightened, because the author hadn't just been rewriting the past, he was already writing her present. You imagine Claire sitting in her darkened apartment, the stack of receipts spread across the table like accusations. Each one bore her name, each one time-stamped at places she had never set foot in. To the outside world, these slips of paper were truth, evidence carved in ink and carbon. But to her, they were a death sentence waiting to be enforced. If the author could forge her movements, he could erase her next. She slid the receipts into evidence bags, hands trembling. Her reflection in the window looked pale, hollow. For a moment, she wondered if this was what Daniel and Rebecca had felt. That slow bleed of reality when you realize your story no longer belongs to you. Someone else is holding the pen. At the FBI lab, technicians compared the forged receipts to known samples from other cases. The handwriting was identical, a looping scrawl too deliberate to be casual, and yet the ink composition was modern. Not aged, not faded. These hadn't been sitting in a box for decades. They had been printed within the last month. The author wasn't a ghost hiding in the past. He was alive, active, and watching. You feel the pressure building. For Claire, the case was no longer professional. It was personal, stitched into her very identity. Every time she glanced over her shoulder, every creak of the floorboards in her apartment, she knew someone was near enough to take photos, forge her presence, and plant receipts where she had never been. Then came the call from Ruiz, her young partner. He had been combing through city surveillance, cross-referencing the timestamps on her fake receipts. "Detective," he said, his voice taut with disbelief, "we've got footage." On a grainy camera outside a diner in Jersey, time-stamped to match one of her receipts, a woman stepped into view. Same height, same build, same haircut. She wore Claire's exact coat. She even carried the same brand of leather satchel slung across her shoulder. But when Ruiz froze the frame, Claire felt the air leave her lungs. The woman turned her head slightly. The resemblance was uncanny, down to the slope of her nose, the sharpness of her jawline. But it wasn't her. It was a double. You imagine seeing yourself on screen, your likeness moving, captured, documented in a place you never stood. The terror of it floods your chest. If the author had doubles, actors, stand-ins, then the receipts weren't the only lies. He was rewriting reality itself, planting physical proof that victims and investigators alike had walked roads they never touched. Ruiz whispered what Claire already knew. "They're building a second version of you." The revelation cracked the case open. What if Daniel and Rebecca hadn't simply disappeared? What if doubles had been used in their story too, creating false sightings, scattering witnesses with conflicting accounts? It explained why some swore they saw the couple after their disappearance, why receipts placed them miles apart at the same hour. The author hadn't just erased them, he had duplicated them, fracturing the truth into unsolvable fragments. Claire dug deeper. Through the archive, she found references to actors in the ledger. Beside certain names were symbols, marks that didn't match the rest. Crosses, circles, triangles. When compared to case files, they matched moments where doubles had been reported. A mother seen at 2 stores at once, a college student cited in 2 counties. The author's genius wasn't in violence. It was in confusion, in creating a world where truth bent so often it eventually broke. But proof of the double wasn't enough. Claire needed to know who these stand-ins were, who recruited them, who paid them. That's when she remembered the initials MSS, Maintenance Services and Supplies. A shell company contracting ordinary labor, plumbers, janitors, cleaners. Workers invisible to the places they served. Workers who could walk into motels and diners unnoticed, blend in, wear someone else's coat, play someone else's role. You can almost hear Claire's voice trembling when she says it aloud. They weren't maintenance crews. They were doubles. The next lead came from an unlikely source. A retired motel clerk named Irene, long forgotten in the old files, who now lived in a nursing home upstate. Claire visited her, carrying photos from the archive. Irene's eyes flickered when she saw Rebecca's Polaroid. "Yes," she whispered. "I saw her that night. But it wasn't her," Claire pressed gently. "What do you mean?" She was smiling, but her eyes, empty, like she didn't know me anymore, and the man in the cap stood right behind her. Irene admitted she had never reported it. She thought she was losing her mind. But now, decades later, she was sure. The woman she saw wasn't Rebecca. It was someone else made to look like her. You feel the dread coil tighter. If the doubles existed, then the Hayes' disappearance wasn't a single moment of abduction. It was a performance, a staged rewriting that stretched across days, weeks, maybe longer. Claire returned to the bureau with Irene's testimony, only to find another envelope waiting on her desk. No postage, no fingerprints, just her name written in the same looping scrawl. Inside was a Polaroid freshly printed. It showed Claire herself sitting in the nursing home room with Irene, notebook in hand. But the photograph wasn't taken by Ruiz, and it wasn't from her own phone. Someone else had been there watching, documenting, adding to the story. Scrawled at the bottom were 4 words. "You can't edit me." Her hands shook as she held it. The realization settling like ice. The author wasn't just rewriting others anymore. He was playing with her directly, framing her as both investigator and victim, turning her into another character in his endless manuscript. And outside the bureau that night, as she walked to her car, she froze. Because sitting in the driver's seat of an identical vehicle parked beside hers was her double. Same coat, same satchel, same face, staring straight ahead as though waiting for direction. You picture the street lamps washing the bureau parking lot in pale yellow light, every shadow stretching long and sharp. Claire stood frozen, staring at the identical vehicle parked beside her own, her breath locking in her chest. Behind the windshield, illuminated just enough by the glow of the dashboard, sat her double. Same dark coat, same satchel resting against her hip, same posture, hands gripping the steering wheel as if poised to drive away. For a terrible instant, Claire thought she was looking at her own reflection in glass. The double didn't flinch. She didn't acknowledge Claire at all. She simply sat there, eyes fixed forward as if awaiting instruction. Then in one slow motion, she raised a gloved hand and tapped the steering wheel twice. Not random. A signal. Claire fumbled for her phone, but before she could snap a photo, the double shifted into gear. The car pulled away, merging into traffic, disappearing into the veins of the city like smoke. By the time Ruiz arrived minutes later, there was nothing left but the echo of tire tracks and Claire's pounding pulse. You imagine being her in that moment, watching yourself drive away, powerless to follow. The line between victim and investigator blurs, the ground beneath you feels unsteady. If the author could conjure a double so convincing, then reality itself was fragile. The bureau scrambled. Surveillance footage from the parking lot revealed the car pulling in 20 minutes earlier, driven by the same woman. The camera caught her face briefly as she stepped out to adjust the mirror. It was Claire's face. Every pore, every wrinkle, every shadow under the eyes. A perfect replica. But the timestamp was even worse. It placed the double arriving at the bureau at the exact same time Claire had been inside giving her report. Proof of 2 Claires in 2 places documented on government cameras. Ruiz slammed the file down in frustration. "They're building a record against you. Soon the paper won't just say you were somewhere else, it'll say you are someone else." That night Claire barely slept. She kept every light on, her gun on the table, her badge clutched in her hand as if the small piece of metal could anchor her to her own identity. The walls of her apartment felt closer, the silence thicker, and when she finally drifted into uneasy dreams, she woke to find an envelope slid beneath her door. Inside was a single photograph. Not of her, not of Daniel or Rebecca, but of her double, sitting at Claire's own desk inside the bureau, staring at the camera with eyes that seemed almost alive. Written across the bottom, "Which one writes the truth?" You feel the chill crawl up your spine. It wasn't just intimidation. It was a declaration. The author had the power to erase her identity, to split her story into fragments until no one believed she had ever been real. Claire pressed deeper into MSS, scouring old employment rosters. Most were fake, placeholders that led nowhere. But one entry stood out. A woman named Lydia Cormack listed as a contractor in 1996. Her photo ID was missing, her address a dead end. But a cross-reference revealed her name attached to another case, 1995, witness to a disappearance in Albany. She had testified briefly, then vanished from records. It was as if she had been erased and reassigned, rewritten into the author's ledger. Claire suspected Lydia was more than a name. She was the template, perhaps the first double. With Ruiz's help, Claire tracked whispers of Lydia to a crumbling brownstone in Brooklyn. The building leaned like a tired man, its windows boarded, its door chained. Inside, beneath layers of dust, they found a room filled with mirrors. Dozens of them, cracked and fogged, facing one another until reflections multiplied into infinity. And on the walls, taped photographs. Not just of Daniel and Rebecca, not just of other missing families, but of Claire herself, repeated over and over. Some old, some new, some from cases decades past, some from last week. Each one slightly different, angles shifted. Expressions varied as if rehearsals had been staged, and doubles trained to replicate her life. Ruiz whispered what Claire already knew but could hardly say aloud. You've been part of his story since the beginning. The weight of it pressed against her ribs. Was she investigating the haze because of chance? Or because the author had written it that way all along? Among the photos, one stood out. A Polaroid dated July 1996, the night Daniel and Rebecca vanished. It showed the couple walking down a hotel hallway, but standing behind them was a woman who looked exactly like Claire, younger, wearing clothes she never owned. Her hand resting on Rebecca's shoulder as though guiding her toward the elevator. The blood drained from her face. Had her likeness been used even then? Had her image been stitched into the haze's disappearance before she ever knew the case existed? The mirrors seemed to close in, the reflections multiplying, endless Claires staring back. And scrawled across one of the mirrors in thick black marker were words that made her chest seize. An author needs a narrator. You can feel her fear nodding into resolve. If the author was weaving doubles into every case, then Claire wasn't just chasing a phantom. She was being groomed, shaped, forced into the role of storyteller for his narrative. And the doubles were tools to make her question her own memories, her own presence, until she became just another character. The sound of footsteps echoed through the brownstone. Claire and Ruiz froze, weapons drawn. The creak of the stairs. The shuffle of deliberate weight. A shadow passed across the cracked glass. A silhouette tall and lean. A cap pulled low. Then a voice, calm and steady, drifting through the air like a sermon. Do you understand now, detective? You were never outside the story. You've always been inside it. And as Claire's flashlight beam swept across the mirrors, one reflection moved when she did not. You imagined the air inside that crumbling brownstone, thick with mildew and dust, the faint metallic tang of rusted pipes seeping into every breath. Claire's flashlight beam wavered across the cracked mirrors, each one multiplying her face into 1,000 fragmented selves. Ruiz stood at her shoulder, pistol steady, but even he looked shaken. Reflections stared back at them, some accurate, some subtly wrong. In one, Claire's eyes were darker. In another, her mouth was curled into a smile she wasn't wearing. And then, in the farthest glass, a reflection shifted a second too late. Her pulse hammered. This wasn't just paranoia. The house was alive with doubles. From the stairwell, the voice drifted again, calm, almost soothing, as if the speaker were explaining a lesson. You keep searching for truth, detective. But truth is only paper. And paper's mine. Ruiz swept his beam toward the sound. Nothing but peeling wallpaper and sagging wood. Yet the presence pressed close, a weight in the air. Claire's light cut across a desk shoved against the wall. On it lay a book, its leather cover cracked, its spine nearly broken. She stepped closer, her breath fogging the glass of the nearest mirror. The book was a ledger. You can picture her fingers brushing the cover, flipping it open despite the prickle racing down her arms. Inside were rows of names, each carefully written in tight block letters. Families, couples, individuals. Next to each name, a date, a location, and a single word. Corrected. Forgotten. Erased. The Hayes names appeared halfway down one page, Daniel H. and Rebecca H. July 1996. Corrected, but below them, Claire's own name. Claire Whitfield, ongoing, narrator. Her knees nearly buckled. This wasn't just evidence of past crimes. It was a script for the present. And she was no longer investigator, but character. Ruiz swore under his breath, snapping photos with his phone. "We have him now," he whispered. "This proves everything." But Claire's eyes locked on the final page. Unlike the others, it wasn't written in block letters. It was scrawled fast, messy as though done in haste. It listed 5 names she didn't recognize, all dated for the coming month, future victims. At the bottom, another word. Draft. Her stomach clenched. The author wasn't finished. He was already writing the next disappearances. Then came the creak. A floorboard above. A shadow sliding across the stairwell. Claire swung her flashlight upward, but all she saw was a glimpse of fabric, a cap brim, the faint outline of a shoulder. Ruiz darted forward, aiming at the stairs, but the figure melted into darkness, retreating with calculated calm. Claire snapped the ledger shut, tucking it under her arm. "We need to move now." You imagine the sprint down the brownstone sagging hallway, the mirrors warping their reflections as they passed, every pane whispering a distorted version of themselves. Behind them, footsteps echoed. Not one set, several. Too many. Doubles? Or something worse. They burst into the night air, lungs burning, the city muffled by the thick pulse of blood in their ears. Their car waited at the curb, but taped to the windshield was another envelope. Claire ripped it free as Ruiz gunned the engine. Inside, a single Polaroid. It showed Claire and Ruiz standing at the very desk they had just left, the ledger open before them, taken from over their shoulders as if someone had been in the room all along. At the bottom, "You read my lines well." Her skin went cold. The author wasn't just ahead of them. He was inside the same space, close enough to breathe the same air, close enough to photograph them unnoticed. Back at the bureau, the ledger became holy evidence. Teams swarmed over it, scanning every page, cross-referencing the names. Some belonged to known missing persons. Others were mysteries. People who had never been reported gone, but whose trails ended abruptly in the late 80s or early 90s. Entire families, lost not to accidents or crime, but to deliberate editing. And the draft entries. Those chilled the room. 5 names. None in databases, but addresses tied to small towns along the Hudson River. If the author's ledger was prophecy as much as history, then 5 lives hung in the balance. Claire argued to intervene immediately, to warn the names, to protect them. But the higher-ups hesitated. Without context, without proof beyond a handwritten ledger, they risked tipping off a man who had eluded capture for decades. You can feel her frustration, her rage. For Claire, every delay was a sentence. She remembered Daniel and Rebecca's rings left on the nightstand. Rebecca's journal scrawled with fear. The Polaroid of them alive one day after their disappearance. If she had learned anything, it was that the author thrived in hesitation. He wrote while others paused, so she made a choice. She and Ruiz went rogue. They drove through the night, tracing the first name in the ledger to a farmhouse outside Poughkeepsie. A single mother, 2 children. Claire knocked at the door, badge in hand, heart pounding. The woman blinked in confusion as Claire explained, urging her to leave, to take her children and go anywhere safe. But as the woman gathered belongings, Claire noticed something chilling on the kitchen counter. A receipt. Gas station. Dated 2 nights ahead. And at the bottom, the woman's name already scrawled in looping ink. Her throat tightened. The author had planted the paper trail before the crime. The disappearance hadn't even happened yet, but the record already existed. Ruiz whispered it first. "He's writing the future." They burned the receipt, but the fear lingered. If the author controlled paper, then he controlled time. The story unfolded as he wrote it, and resisting him meant tearing pages from a book already published in someone else's mind. By dawn, the family was gone, evacuated under protection. Claire prayed they had bought time, but the weight of the ledger pressed harder. 4 more names waited. 4 more drafts. Back in New York, Claire sat at her kitchen table, staring at the photographs taped across her wall. The man in the cap, blurry but ever present. The doubles. The mirrors. The Polaroids that seemed to come from nowhere. She pressed her hands against her eyes, whispering to herself, "What if I'm not me? What if I'm already the double?" The thought festered until it became unbearable. She stumbled to the bathroom, flicked on the light, and stared into the mirror. Her own face looked back, tired, hollow, unfamiliar. She leaned closer, searching her own eyes for signs of forgery. For a terrible instant, she swore the reflection smiled on its own. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She grabbed it with shaking hands. Another text. 4 words, glowing against the screen. Check the last page. She tore the ledger from its evidence bag, flipping to the final sheet. Beneath the 5 draft entries in handwriting so fresh the ink smudged against her fingers was one more name, Claire Whitfield, correction pending. And as she stared at the words, a sound drifted from her darkened living room, the click of a Polaroid camera. You imagine the silence of Claire's apartment, thick and suffocating, broken only by the mechanical whir of a Polaroid camera. She froze, the ledger still open on her lap, the fresh ink of her own name staining her fingertips. Correction pending. The phrase was a sentence, not a warning, not a possibility, a decision already made. Her heart thudded in her ears as she rose, gun drawn, scanning the shadows of the living room. Every object looked unfamiliar, distorted in the dim light. The lamp on the end table glowed too softly. The curtains swayed though the windows were closed. And on the coffee table, face up, lay the photograph that had just been taken. It showed Claire herself seated exactly as she had been moments ago, the ledger open before her. But in the photo, she wasn't alone. A man in a cap stood behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder, his face blurred by motion, her skin prickled with a cold sweat. She had been alone. She should have been alone. You imagine her pressing her back to the wall, gun steady, every nerve alight. Ruiz was only minutes away, but in minutes anything could happen. The author didn't work in years or decades anymore. He worked in moments, rewriting the present before her eyes. A voice came from the darkness, low, calm, rehearsed like scripture. You've done well, detective. Better than most. But even narrators reach their final page. Her flashlight beam cut across the room, landing on the silhouette by the window, the man in the cap, Victor K. His posture relaxed, his presence deliberate, as though he had been waiting for her to see him. You forged them all, she said, her voice cracking but strong. The Hayes, the McCaffreys, everyone. He tilted his head. Forged? No, authored. They live on paper now. Paper is forever. You feel her rage build, sharp and hot. You erase people. He stepped closer, his face still in shadow. I give them permanence. The world forgets the living, detective. But paper? Paper does not forget. Claire's finger tightened on the trigger, but he was already moving. Slipping back into the darkness, his voice drifting through the apartment. And soon your story will be complete. The lights cut out. The apartment sank into black. Panic clawed her chest as she felt her way along the wall, gun raised, ears straining for movement. A sound brushed against her right, footsteps circling, deliberate. She spun, fired. The muzzle flash lit the room for a heartbeat, but the bullet struck only plaster. Then a whisper at her ear, "You can't shoot a draft." Her elbow swung back, connecting with empty air. The room felt endless now, stretched by fear and silence. She reached for her phone, but it was gone. Snatched from the table, erased from her grasp as easily as a receipt signed in false ink. And then the lights flickered back. Ruiz stood in the doorway, weapon drawn, eyes wide. "Detective!" But the room was empty. No man in a cap, no shadow. Only the photograph on the table, the ledger still bleeding ink, and the word correction seared into her mind. They fled the apartment, the evidence secured, but safety was an illusion. The author wasn't a ghost hiding in the past. He was in every shadow, every record, every receipt. He could bend truth at will, and now Claire was the target. You imagine the days that followed. Bureau analysts working nonstop, tracing the 5 draft names. Some families were moved to safe houses. Others refused protection, unable to believe they were part of a manuscript they couldn't see. Claire visited each, her words heavy with urgency, but her eyes always scanning for doubles in the crowd, for reflections that moved too slowly, for receipts that appeared where none should exist. The Hayes case no longer stood alone. It was a single chapter in a saga that stretched across decades, a chain of disappearances bound not by place, not by motive, but by authorship. Someone had decided whose lives mattered and whose would be rewritten into silence, and still the text came. Always from unknown numbers, always short, sharp, cruel. Page turner. Draft complete. Correction in progress. Claire barely slept. Ruiz urged her to rest, to let others carry the case. But she couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel and Rebecca in that Polaroid, their smiles brittle, their eyes hollow. She heard the faint click of the camera in her apartment, proof that the author could be anywhere, anytime. Then, one morning, another package arrived. No return address. Inside was a stack of photographs. Not Polaroids this time, but glossy prints. They showed her double in different places across the city, entering diners, checking into motels, buying gas. Each one time-stamped, each one building a record, and at the very bottom of the stack, the final photo. Claire, or her double lying lifeless in a motel bed, her badge on the nightstand. You can feel the dread swell in your chest. The author wasn't threatening her. He was scripting her end. She tore the photo to shreds, but the damage was done. If the author could fabricate her death, then she was already one step from being erased entirely. By evening, she sat with Ruiz on a bench overlooking the Hudson. The city glimmered around them, alive and indifferent. She whispered what she had kept inside. What if I'm not the real one? What if I'm already the double? Ruiz shook his head, his hand gripping her shoulder. I know you. I've watched you bleed, fight, refuse to quit. Doubles don't fight like that. You're real. But his eyes betrayed doubt, and she saw it. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, Claire opened the ledger one last time. The fresh ink had spread, bleeding into the page, warping the paper. Beneath her name, a single sentence had appeared, as if written by an invisible hand. The narrator never knows she's the draft. Her stomach lurched. She wanted to tear the book apart, scatter it into the river, but she couldn't. It was evidence, testimony, scripture. Destroying it meant destroying proof of the author's existence. She closed it gently, her hands shaking. That night, she dreamed of Daniel and Rebecca again. They were standing on the deck of a ship, staring directly at her, their faces a mixture of pleading and warning. Behind them, the man in the cap. And when she tried to speak, her voice was gone, as if she had never existed at all. She woke gasping, the Polaroid camera lying on her nightstand, though she had never owned one. A fresh photo slid from its slot, still developing in the pale light. She lifted it with trembling fingers. It showed her asleep in her own bed. You imagine holding that photo, realizing someone stood in your room, close enough to touch, documenting your every breath. And beneath the image, 3 words appeared as the ink darkened. Correction complete. But Claire was still alive. Still breathing. Still fighting for now. The last photograph lay on Claire's nightstand, the words correction complete, bleeding into the white border. Yet she was still alive, still clutching the ledger, still desperate to understand if she was the hunter or the prey. The author had blurred the line so deeply that even she could no longer trust her own reflection. Somewhere, perhaps in another mirror, another motel, another forgotten storage unit, the story continued to be written, and the question that haunted every investigator, every family, every viewer remained. Was Claire still herself, or had the double already taken her place? What do you think? Was the author a single man orchestrating decades of vanishings, or an entire network rewriting reality itself? Could Claire survive the correction, or had she already been edited out long before she knew it? Tell us what you believe in the comments. Some stories were never meant to stay buried. Don't let them vanish. Keep them alive with us.